Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. As part of our how-to series, we're going to look at how to recognize our own spoken language and use it as compelling evidence to conquer doubt about mind-body experience. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and I'll get back to you personally. In addition, we do have our website up. On that website, you can sign up for my seminars or get any PDFs. All of the descriptions are right there. It's www.crushingdoubt.org. One of the things that I have found is very important to concentrate on in getting people better from this is to look at different pieces of logic and how they provide information. I just did a video on all of the things that converge in mind-body theory and why that makes for a better theory than these other theories. So I'm going to give you another example, another piece of information that you can use to hammer doubt, and that is metaphors. I'm going to explain what I mean by that. First of all, what is a metaphor? Now, many of you out there will know what a metaphor is, but I want to look at a specific angle on it. It is a comparison that has its origin in reality. So we think of metaphors as kind of just a poetic thing, but the fact is, every metaphor you've ever heard or used is based on either an actual occurrence, an observation, or some actual meaning that created that language. So think about it. When people say he's in over his head, this came from someone actually drowning. That's where that metaphor comes from, the origin of that language. Or she bit off more than she could chew. It came from someone choking. This actually happened. These are the actual occurrences I'm talking about. Putting your foot in your mouth, that's probably not something that did actually happen, but it comes from a direct, literal meaning that the language meant something. And I'll tell you where it came from. It came from something called foot and mouth disease. It was about stepping in something that you shouldn't, being in a place you shouldn't be. That's where that expression comes from. So it comes from reality. Happy as a clam is an expression because clams actually look like they have a tight-lipped smile. Or down in the mouth comes from that frowning expression. Your mouth is actually turned down. These are all literal. So what is my point? Here's my point. We don't just say things for poetic reasons. We may be a poetic species in general, but it always comes from an actual meaning. So with that in mind, what can we make of the incredible number of metaphors there are about the body? Is it possible that these metaphors are just poetic and didn't come from any kind of reality? Not a chance. So let's go over some of those metaphors. I actually have a list of hundreds of these, but I'm just going to give you some. A person can be experienced as a pain in the ass or neck, but nobody thinks, that means the emotional experience with that person can actually lead to that pain in the ass or neck. But guess what? It can. That's why that expression exists. When we're disgusted with someone, we say, "You make me sick." That's not just an expression. That has actually happened thousands upon thousands of times in history, and it became such a regularity that it became a saying. Someone can be a hothead when they're angry or be hot-tempered. Their temperature actually goes up, or at least their subjective experience of heat goes up when they're angry. It's true. And when people get angry, blood rushes to their face. The blood flow changes. It makes it actually hotter. A bad experience can leave a bitter taste in your mouth. Believe it or not, I've actually had that symptom. I have had some experience I didn't like, and I actually had a bitter taste in my mouth. This comes from somewhere, and we just have forgotten that this is true. We tell people who are worried, don't sweat it, or something significant is nothing to sneeze at. But everyone has forgotten that these metaphors are real. When we're irritated about something, we actually might sneeze from that. True, you can sneeze from getting sawdust in the nose or from getting hit in the nose, but you also can sneeze when you're irritated. It happens to me all the time. If something's a major inconvenience, we say, "What a headache." Or in a tense situation, things are heating up. Or when something is disturbing to a huge degree, it can make your skin crawl. A hard situation can bring you nothing but heartache. I could go on and on and on. But all of these metaphors mean something, and you can use them against doubt. Because they wouldn't all exist if the mind-body condition weren't very, very real. So what I want you to do, what I'm encouraging you to do with this, is use the metaphors of the body, just the awareness of them, to be more confident in the diagnosis. It's yet another piece of convergent evidence that it all comes together around the fact that mind-body theory really is correct. After all, what are all of these metaphors doing in our language? The assumption that we just really love poetry, it's taking on a lot of different assumptions. It's taking on the assumptions that we don't mean what we say, that some metaphors don't come from reality when virtually all of them do. It's taking on the assumption that we know so little about our own experience that what we're saying has nothing to do with reality. I can go on and on. All of these assumptions don't make sense, and when we think about Occam's razor, which I talk about a lot of the time, that is the theory that the more assumptions you have to make, the less likely it is to be true. All these metaphors point in the direction that mind-body theory is very likely to be true, and these other things are not. So, listen, it is true that visceral metaphors capture something deep because they're visceral. We can feel them. But what this speaks to, really, is just the fact that we feel things so deeply in the body that it actually supports mind-body ideology all the more. We have these metaphors all over the place because we know how deeply we feel it. There's a metaphor for so many TMS/mind-body, whatever we want to call that, symptoms, that it once again calls into question which theory is calling for more assumptions, like I said. Structural theories require that we ignore huge amounts of information, and the sheer number of suggestive metaphors really is another piece of information that structural theory is requiring us to ignore. I don't trust any theory that's requiring us to ignore information. That's the thing about mind-body theory. It does not ask you to ignore information. These things do, and that should be a red flag to everybody. The thing that I want people to see is that these little facts about life that fit with mind-body experience are not just little. They are major corroborative pieces of evidence for mind-body thinking. They all support the mind-body theory, and they fit in with it, but they all clash with these other theories, and that should tell you something. These bodily metaphors, these mind-body metaphors, they exist in languages around the world in addition. And these were cultures that developed completely separate from one another. You have to remember, there was not travel between these two places, all of these different places. There wasn't travel between them. This developed in ancient China. It developed in Africa. It developed in Europe. It developed in the Native American cultures. I've done the research on this. I've seen these metaphors are everywhere. Mind-body thinking has been here since the beginning of time in all of these different cultures that had nothing to do with each other. That is another piece of corroborative evidence that mind-body theory is real. Whereas who has theories about MRI machines proving everything just by these visualizations? We didn't have MRI machines, of course, but back then. But you don't have that corroborative evidence from every culture. It becomes glaringly obvious that the mind-body theory is much more in sync with reality. There's writing in the history and literature of nearly every major culture, in fact. So literature is a place to look. I do have a chapter in my book coming up that talks about this, from the early days of Plato and Socrates all the way through Jane Austen and up until today. Bodily metaphors are throughout. Medicine, modern Western medicine, wants us to throw out all this information, but any theory that asks you to throw out information is not going to be a helpful theory. Once again, science is a prerequisite to supporting mind-body theory. You must have the correct science. But the thing that leads the charge against doubt is logic. What I'm talking to you about today is another piece of the logic that you bring to hammer against doubt. So you must ask yourself, do you believe that these metaphors are just fancy ways of talking? Or that they are unlike every other metaphor and have no basis in reality? Or that they could have developed in hundreds of different cultures independently with just a strange coincidence to support this? We see cultures have very specific differences from each other that did not spread or come about independently, but yet we think this common phenomenon that came in every single one somehow did randomly spread. It's not following logic. The logic is so strained, in fact, so obviously and so quickly, it should set off alarm bells everywhere. When you hear these theories that require you to ignore information, that is an alarm bell that you should sound immediately. But what happens instead? Society has turned a blind eye. Well, there's another metaphor for you. And why is this? It's because we have, as a society, a collective will to deny what is right in front of our faces, that we can know so much more about ourselves if we stop denying the reality of these metaphors. Imagine what it would be like if we knew these metaphors were true. Now, I do. I walk around and I see someone sneeze and I think, that person's irritated about something. There is a part of even me that kind of wishes, let's not get into that. We know too much. But the fact is, you can't know too much. It's good to know information. So as is often the case with mind-body issues, they hide in plain sight. And such is the case with how they hide in our language. They hide by being so ever-present that we don't even stop to think about them. All of these metaphors, we have stopped thinking about them. And I encourage you, start thinking about them. Start thinking about what does it mean that we have them in our language. Use the obvious results of logical thinking in this area, and you'll have far less doubt that mind-body issues are pervasive, the human condition, and exist from head to toe because we have metaphors from head to toe. Just, you can go through metaphors. Every part of the body has a metaphor like this, and it's all for the same reason. If you use logic, you know why. The mind-body theory is the one that recognizes this logic, where the logic fits in. The other theories do not, and that should tell you something. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally.